Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about a huge piece of education, the test. But we're not talking about those bubble sheets you remember. We're going to look way beyond that, at some really powerful and, frankly, more meaningful ways to figure out what students are actually learning.
So let's just start with this one question, because it kind of changes everything. For so long, we've thought of tests as the finish line, right? The final score. But what if we flip that on its head? What if the test itself was part of the learning journey? Thinking about it that way, well, it opens up a whole new world.
But before we can get to the solutions, we first have to wrap our heads around the core problem. It's this fundamental dilemma that pretty much every single educator has to deal with.
And here it is. On one side, you've got practicality. I mean, let's be real. Assessments have to be efficient, easy to grade, especially when you've got a ton of students. But on the other side, you have this idea called positive washback. All that really means is, does the test actually help you learn? A great assessment makes you want to study deeply, not just cram facts. The problem, the dilemma, is that these two things are almost always pulling in opposite directions.
So, how do we fix this? How do we find that sweet spot between something that's practical and something that creates powerful learning? Well, let's dive into some really cool methods that are changing the game.
First up is a major shift in thinking. It's called performance-based assessment. And instead of asking, hey, what do you know? It asks, what can you do with what you know? It's all about applying your knowledge to real, tangible tasks.
So you can forget filling in bubbles. Think about a student building a website, or giving a really persuasive presentation, or maybe putting together a portfolio of their best work. These kinds of tasks just naturally measure skills that a traditional test can't even touch, things like creative problem solving and actual critical thinking.
Okay, our next method is a lot more personal. Imagine an assessment where it's not about getting the right answer, but it's all about the process of figuring things out. It's a tool that's also a kind of conversation, one that the student is having with themselves about their own learning.
Journals are just incredible tools because they give you a direct window into how a student is thinking. You can use them to track progress, have students respond to really complex ideas, and this is the big one, they encourage metacognition. It's a fancy word, but it just means thinking about how you think. And let me tell you, that is a superpower for any learner.
So we went from that internal conversation inside a journal to a direct, human one. This next method brings assessment right into the dialogue, right into the conversation between the teacher and the student.
Whether it's one-on-one or in a little group, these conversations let educators give super personalized feedback. They give you all this valuable qualitative data, the stories, the why behind a student's work. That's something a grade of, say, 85% could never, ever tell you.
All right, now this is where things get really fascinating. What happens when we stop seeing students as just people who get feedback, and we actually empower them to be part of the evaluation process themselves?
It all starts with self-assessment. This is about teaching students to look at their own work with a critical eye. It completely changes the question from, what did I get wrong? To, okay, how can I make this better? That builds this incredible sense of ownership over their own learning.
And building right on top of that, you have peer assessment. This is where students learn how to give good, constructive feedback to each other. And it's not just about pointing out mistakes. It builds collaboration, and it teaches an absolutely crucial life skill, how to give a critique thoughtfully, and maybe just as important, how to take one gracefully.
But, of course, you can't just throw students in and say, okay, go assess each other. That would be chaos. To make this all work fairly and effectively, they need the right tools. We're talking about clear rubrics that show exactly what success looks like, simple checklists, and good reflection prompts to guide their thinking.
So this all sounds pretty great in theory, right? But how do teachers actually make this happen in a real classroom without it all falling apart? Well, it really boils down to just a few key principles.
Yeah, success really hangs on three things. First, the criteria have to be crystal clear. Everybody needs to know what the target is. Second, you have to actually train students on how to give feedback that's helpful, not just mean. And third, and this is probably the most important part, you have to build a culture of a growth mindset, where feedback is seen as a gift that helps you improve, not as some kind of personal attack.
So at the end of the day, here's the crucial point. It doesn't matter if it's a portfolio, a journal, or a peer review. The assessment should never feel like the separate, stressful thing. It should be woven right into the fabric of the learning process itself, directly helping students build the skills and knowledge that we actually want them to have.
And that really leaves us with one big question to chew on.
For so long, education has been all about that final score. But what if we just shifted our focus a little bit? What if we built a system that celebrated the journey, the growth, the effort, the progress, just as much as it celebrates the final result? Now that is a question worth thinking about.